The following program has been produced and funded as a public service by Rogers Cable System. Expressed in the following program do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers Toronto Cable 10.
Rogers Toronto Cable 10 presents Ontario Vote 90, a debate featuring leaders of the fringe parties. Good evening. I'm David Schatzky, and on behalf of Rogers Toronto Cable 10 and Rogers Communications Incorporated, I want to welcome you to Ontario Vote 90. This is one of a series of programs designed to acquaint you with the parties, the candidates, and the issues in this provincial election. Tonight, you'll have the chance to speak to representatives of some of the alternative parties. They are Elizabeth Rowley of the Communist Party, Louis di Rocco of the Family Coalition Party, Robert Metz of the Freedom Party, Jim Harris of the Green Party, and James Stock of the Libertarians. If you have a question or comment for any one of these party representatives, you can call now at 416, that's 416-445-5580, 416-445-5580. Please keep your comments brief and to the point so that we can get as many people on the air as possible. Now, here's how we proceed this evening. Each party representative will have a 1-minute opening statement, and after the opening statements, we will then go to you, the viewer, for your question. The party to whom the question is addressed will have at most 60 seconds to reply, and then the other parties will have 30 seconds to respond to that reply. At the end of the program, each party will have 60 seconds for a closing statement. And now, here are the opening statements. First, Elizabeth Rowley of the Communist Party.
Good evening. Thank you very much for that introduction, David. I'd like to begin by thanking Rogers Cable for organizing this debate this evening. It's a very welcome opportunity for all of us to address the issues that are so important in this election campaign. I'd like to say, however, that I think it would have been much better had all of the leaders of all of the parties in Ontario had a chance to debate together and not be separated on the basis of those who are presently incumbents, which it seems to me is rather undemocratic, and those who aspire to be incumbents, such as myself and others at this table. I think that the notion of democracy, glasnost, etc., which is very important these days, including in Ontario, demands that everyone have a fair chance and an equal opportunity. I was debating Shaviva Hosek this evening. I'd like her to be here so I could continue to, or better yet, her boss, David Peterson. On the issues, we think that now it's time to move politics to the left in Ontario. If you care to ask some questions, I'd be very pleased to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, for the Family Coalition Party, Louis di Rocco.
My name is Louis di Rocco. I'm the president of the Family Coalition Party and FCP candidate in Scarborough North, one of 68 FCP candidates in this election, giving us candidates in over half the constituencies in the province. Our party believes that the old parties have lost touch with the real needs of Ontario families. They have abandoned the values which made our province strong. They have even allowed major attacks on family life and our traditional value system. I know most of you are fed up, and some of you are even intending not to vote. I hope you will reconsider. There is an alternative for you, the Family Coalition Party, a party based on solid moral principles, a party of integrity and accountability. The FCP is ready to do what has to be done. Reduce bureaucracy, end overtaxation, protect the rights of workers not to work on Sundays, and many other things. If you want more of the same, vote for the old parties. If you want a real change, vote for the Family Coalition Party.
And now, Robert Metz of the Freedom Party.
Thank you, David. Fundamentally, as president and leader of the Freedom Party of Ontario, I represent a political party that is very different from the mainstream parties and the other parties that are with me here tonight. Fundamentally, we believe that the purpose of a government in a free society is to protect the individual's freedom of choice and not to restrict it. What this basically translates into is we believe that it's the government's job to prevent some people from imposing their views upon other people and not the reverse. This is a critical difference between our party and the rest. be they large or small, their fundamental agenda is to force you to go by their way of thinking and to force you to pay more taxes. I invite you to inquire more about Freedom Party this evening and see how this philosophy works in action. Thank you very much.
And now for the Green Party, Jim Harris.
A species is a once-in-a-universe event. It's a miracle of creation. And in the normal course of events, a species disappears from Earth once every 2,000 years. But currently, species are dying at a rate of 1 every 25 minutes. It's a crime against creation. It's a crime against this beautiful Earth that we have inherited. The Green Party is getting involved in this election because we can no longer stand by until destruction that the government has shown it is incapable of dealing with. If I told you 30 years ago that today you'd be drinking bottled water, you would have laughed at me. But tonight, if I tell you that in 30 years you'll be breathing bottled air, will you laugh? In 100 years' time, when there's no fresh water left to drink, when there's no unpolluted air to breathe, and when there's no uncontaminated land to grow food on, how much will all our material wealth be worth?
Thank you very much. And now for the Libertarians, James Stock.
Thank you, David. And first of all, I'd like to thank Rogers Cable for the opportunity to present Libertarian views here tonight. Basically, the Libertarian philosophy is to reduce the government bureaucracy in order to reduce your taxes. You can't do one without the other. You've heard a lot lately from the Liberals and Tories about their stand on taxes, how they will reduce taxes, and now the Liberals are calling themselves tax fighters. But the record shows that between them, the federal Tories and Liberals and the provincial Tories and Liberals have now raised your taxes to 53% of your income. On top of that, you're spending about 30% for housing and another 7% for food, which leaves you just 10% or 10 cents on the dollar to do everything else. That's to buy clothes, travel, vacations, and savings. Very predictably, most people are not saving anymore. And we think, as libertarians, that you should have much better than that. So we'd encourage you to vote Libertarian in this election if you really want less government and lower taxes.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to go right to our calls. And first, for the Green Party, a question for the Green Party from Greg. Greg, hello.
Yes, actually, my question was directed to the Family Coalition Party.
All right, go ahead.
It deals with people living with AIDS and how the drugs that will be made available to people living with AIDS, since they affect very small numbers and the cost of these drugs will be very high, how the parties intend to see that people living with AIDS will get these drugs made available to them.
All right, I think the question is
without paying costs that are exorbitantly high.
Sir, your question is very clear, easily understood. Let's go for an answer then to the Family Coalition Party.
Okay, we believe that anybody who gets AIDS, regardless of how they contacted the disease or contracted it, should be treated because they are seriously ill, just like any other person who has any other disease. So as much money should be available, balancing the needs of all the health care in the province should be made available to those people. At the same time, however, we would try to educate people as to the real cause for the spread of AIDS. And I think we would definitely stop the safe sex campaign on TV, which promotes condoms as a way to stop the spread of AIDS. This would not stop the spread of AIDS.
All right, thank you very much. Is there a yes from the Green Party? Jim Harris.
That is absolutely ludicrous. We need more education. The AIDS is transmitted through sexual contact that isn't safe sex. Condoms are a way of stopping AIDS. We need more education on this issue. On the issue of AIDS, we seem to be hung up about sexuality and homosexuality in our society. We need to break these taboos, and we need more spending in the area. We spend more on nuclear research than we do on AIDS research, and we have to address serious problems which threaten the health of our population, such as the AIDS issue.
Elizabeth Rowley for the Communists.
Well, I'd have to agree with the speaker from the Green Party, Jim Harris. In addition to that, I'd like to point out that the healthcare crisis in this province has been caused, first of all, by of Conservative rule in Ontario, followed by 5 years of Liberal rule. There is a crisis in all aspects of healthcare,
okay,
including
I think could you
AIDS.
address the question specifically? You're going into a general
Well,
discussion.
well, that's because I
the
think that
question
AIDS
was specifically
is,
about AIDS.
Yes, but AIDS has to do with healthcare, surely. And it seems to me that the whole area of healthcare is in deep trouble, and so is AIDS as a result of that.
All right, Robert Metz of the Freedom Party.
Yes, I think the question was less about AIDS than it was about funding for AIDS, getting the money that's necessary to see to it that the disease can be stopped or prevented. And I think if you're counting on the government for this kind of aid, I think you're going to run out of more than false expectations here, because the government's out of money. The fundamental issue here is what you're dealing with when you're talking about money is never the symptoms of a disease or whatever we're talking about. We're talking about poverty. And I think it's foolhardy for governments to direct money at resources and at institutions and hospitals instead of directing them at the people who need the help.
Thank you very much. Very briefly, Mr. Stock.
Well, libertarians believe that, of course, education is necessary for this problem. Treatment is necessary. But this dispensation of free condoms is a very hilarious method of dealing with a problem which goes much deeper than protective devices.
Thank you very much. And now, Carrie, you have a question, Carrie?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to know what each of the parties are going to do about the funding mess that our education system is in, and particularly the damage done to it by Bill 30, which all of the three major parties supported and gives funding to the separate schools.
Thank you. We'll just quite arbitrarily start with the Libertarians and work round.
Education, everybody seems to think that you can deal with the problem by throwing money at it. That's not the way to deal with the problem. The problem is administrative, organizational, and also in the objectives that have now been adopted. Ever since the Hall Dennis report was published and implemented, provincial standard testing disappeared, and with it all the standards in the schools. We need a fundamental re-examination of how we conduct our schooling and a general improvement. As far as funding is concerned, we believe that those people that wish to pay for private education should be able to do so and get a tax incentive to do it.
Thank you. For the Green Party.
We have to begin seeing government as an ordering of economic spending priorities. And the current government has shown that it supports hugely expensive projects such as nuclear power. Now, Darlington was originally, I realize,
yeah,
David,
why do you
it
bring it
doesn't,
right to, if you
I want
can't
to come
address
right to it.
Okay,
it
do.
comes very quickly. We spend billions of dollars on nuclear power. Half the provincial debt is due to Ontario Hydro. That's so much money that could be freed up for education, health services, and so on. And on the issue of Bill 30, the Green Party supports local communities' rights to determine their own destiny. So if education is needed in French, we support local communities being able to receive that.
All right. For the Freedom Party.
Well, fundamentally, David, we at Freedom Party believe that the taxpayer should be allowed to direct his education taxes to the school or educational institution of his choice.
Thank you. For the Family Coalition Party?
Okay, we believe also in the parents' rights in this matter, and that parents' rights should be respected. They should be able to educate their children according to their values and without being penalized financially. We would increase the funding of the provincial share of education back to 60% the way it used to be, and base it on the income tax rather than on property tax alone.
Thank you. For the Communists.
We think that education is in deep trouble, public education in Ontario, in part the heritage of 43 years of Tory rule, and in part because of Bill 30. The Communist Party was the only party to oppose Bill 30 in 1985, and the last 5 years show why. There have been communities from all parts of this province have been ripped from one end to the other by sectarian religious differences. It's time to separate church and school.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. And now we're going to go to a call for the Family Coalition Party from Steve. Steve, hello.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, I have a short question for Mr. di Rocco. Does his party have a position on homosexuality? And if so, what is it?
Thank you for the question. Go ahead.
Well, I think I know what he means by the question. We're opposed, obviously, to the practice of homosexuality. we think it's an unnatural act and should not be condoned or promoted in any way by government.
All right, perhaps another candidate would like to respond. Yes, for the Greens, and then for the Libertarians.
We strongly believe in an individual's right to express their sexuality in any way they choose, and the same goes for freedom of religious expression, and we don't believe in discrimination on racial or religious grounds.
All right, for the Libertarians.
Libertarian position is that this is a personal matter and should not be invaded or directed or controlled in any way by government policy.
Thank you. For the Freedom Party?
Yeah, usually when we get a question about homosexuality, it relates to homosexual rights. And I have to say fundamentally that we don't believe in homosexual rights anymore than we believe in women's rights or any sort of group rights. There's only one kind of right that actually exists, and that is an individual right. And if you're an individual, the government should treat you the same as every other person.
For the Communist Party?
Well, the question is civil rights, and it has to do indeed with the rights of all people to work and to have the opportunity to receive benefits and so on. That's the question that's at issue in politics today. Those who want to take away rights, of course, rights that have been hard won by the homosexual community or the women's community or Aboriginal rights, I think it would be very important for them to say that here tonight so that everybody knows exactly which party comes from where. We stand for strengthened democratic rights, not weakened rights.
Thank you very much. And now Maureen has a question for the Freedom Party.
Yes, I'd like to direct it specifically to Mr. Metz and to Mr. Stock. Okay. Initially, it seems their parties are similar, and I would like to find out, since they both seem to be working towards the rights of the individual, how they fundamentally feel their parties might differ, in the sense that I feel that if they're so similar, why they wouldn't be working towards the same means.
Why they might not, in fact, join together. All right, Mr. Metz for the Freedom Party?
Well, I'd be most happy if Libertarians would like to join Freedom Party and work with us. But I, as a past Libertarian myself, know that this is a party that won't be getting anywhere. I hesitate to say this, but the Libertarians have done more damage to the name of freedom and to what they're supposedly promoting than anyone can imagine. We are getting fallout from the Libertarian Party.
Let's go to the Libertarians then.
I'd like to thank the last speaker for his compliments. The Libertarian Party has existed for 15 years. The Freedom Party was a splinter party that disagreed with us about the way that the party should be organized. Briefly, they're totally decentralized, whereas we believe in a more or less homogeneous party with party platform guidelines.
Thank you. And now I think Garth has a question for the Green Party. Hello.
Hello. Hello. I have a question for Mr. Harris, and that is specifically what you would do about the garbage problem that we presently have in Ontario with regards to both the landfill sites and the waste with regards to the energy that's lost with waste.
Thank you.
That's an excellent question. In Ontario alone, we produce 25 million kilograms of waste from fast food restaurants, and most of it is non-biodegradable plastics and styrofoams. A green government would place a tax on non-reusable items in our garbage-producing society so that it become more economical to use plates, for instance. Each one of us in Ontario consumes 190 pounds of plastic every year. A third of it is thrown out immediately as excess packaging.
All right, thank you. For the Libertarians, yes?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think what is really necessary now is that we have a concerted policy, a coherent policy, which results in a great deal less garbage that cannot be recycled or dealt with in any other way, but dump it. But there are other methods of dealing with that also.
In the communist response?
Well, we would like to see provincially owned solid waste reduction plants which could collect up all of the garbage that's left after we do everything that we can to eliminate garbage. But garbage can be burned. There's a difference of opinion about the efficiency of burning garbage, but if it's burned at a high enough temperature, the dioxins that are produced when it's burned at a low temperature will disappear.
Thank you.
So we think that, well, just a moment, I have one other thing to say, and that is that garbage is a very profitable business. If it was owned by the provincial government, the steam and the energy that is produced could be used by municipalities and cut costs there.
For the Family Coalition Party?
Well, I think the #1 priority in this area should be not to produce waste. Just one example, we reuse all kinds of bottles, but we don't reuse, for example, ketchup bottles, whiskey bottles. You know, why can't we extend that program to other areas? I think if we do that, we can reduce the garbage by 70 to 90%, and then use high-tech technology such as high-tech incinerators to get rid of the rest.
Thank you. For the Freedom Party?
Yes, for many years now, governments have artificially been subsidizing the price of waste disposal, simply making it cheaper for us to get rid of things that could otherwise be recycled rather than recycle them. So instead of adding more taxes to the tax burden, I think what we should do is cut the subsidy to the way the government collects garbage and make homeowners and industries more individually responsible for how they dispose of their waste.
Right. Thank you. And now we'll go to another caller who is on, let's see, line 2. Hello. Yes, what is your question, please?
I'd like to know where the candidates stand on the issue of Sunday shopping.
All right, we'll just again start arbitrarily at this end with the Communist Party and work through. Your stand on Sunday shopping?
We're opposed to Sunday shopping. In addition to all the other arguments that have been given, the fact is that Sunday shopping would increase prices because there are not any extra bucks out there to spend, but there are extra costs of hiring people to work on Sunday. That would raise prices. And we also need a common pause day.
Family Coalition Party.
I agree with that. The principal question here is workers' rights. Workers must be protected from employers who would, for example, refuse initial employment or refuse promotions. And the only way to do that is to have one common universal day of rest for workers and their families.
For the Freedom Party?
Yes, we fundamentally support freedom of choice in Sunday shopping. And, you know, if you have Sunday shopping laws, you're violating fundamental rights. You're violating property rights of property owners. You're violating the rights of people who want to make a choice that might be different from that of others. The whole idea of living in a free society is so that we can each exercise our choices and be responsible for them.
Before we get the responses of the other two parties, let me just remind you that you're watching a special program on Rogers Cable 10 Toronto and Rogers Communications Incorporated, the Ontario network, and you're listening and seeing the leaders and representatives of the alternative parties. If you have a question for any one of these alternative party representatives, you can call area code 416-445-5580, 445-5580. And just so you know, the parties represented here are the Communist, Family Coalition, Freedom, Green, and Libertarian parties. And now let's go to the Green Party for a response to the question having to do with Sunday shopping. Jim Harris.
The Green Party believes that communities should have greater control over their own affairs. And in that light, on the issue of Sunday shopping, we would say that local municipalities should be able to determine on their own policies on it.
For the Libertarians?
In a multicultural society, a common pause day certainly doesn't work. And on the other hand, the workers' right to, or need for a day of rest should also be protected. So what is the solution? The solution is to protect the workers' right to a day of rest, which is properly protected by law, which doesn't mean that he has to sue his employer to get it. And alternatively, that shopkeepers may open any day they wish for any hours that they wish to do so.
Thank you. And now a question for the Freedom Party from Steve. Hello.
Oh.
Yes. Your question, please.
Yeah, I'd like to ask them what they think about giving me the right to recall for, you know, when people get up there, they give you all the promises, and if they want to give a recall.
All right. Robert Metz, do you understand that question?
Not quite.
Okay, maybe you could explain a little bit more clearly what you mean.
Okay. You know, when they get up there and they tell you all these promises, and I want to have the right to, you know, start a petition to recall them from their Queen's Park.
You mean that to make them resign or give up their seat if they don't live up to their promises?
Force a by-election because they told, you know, they ran on one thing and then they said another thing.
Thank you very much. First of all, Mr. Metz.
Well, this comes down to, I guess, responsibility in government and having the ability to recall someone from government. I mean, that's what elections are for, and this is your chance to recall the people from government that you're unhappy with now. And there's more choices than ever before, and this is the time to make one. I think in that sense, we certainly do represent responsible government, and we don't think in a funny sort of way that governments can be responsible. They can only enforce individual responsibility. That's where they're effective. They should be the referee, not a player in the game.
Now to Elizabeth Rowley for the Communist Party.
I think that's an important question. I support the right to recall. I think that would be an important part of a reformed election act. I also think that if we had a system of proportional representation whereby those elected were elected as a result of the popular vote, we would in fact, sitting around this table, be incumbents in Parliament now. So I think there's a good deal that needs to be reformed. Recall is one of them.
Thank you. And James Stock for the Libertarians.
It's a nice idea, but I don't think it could work. How are you going to determine when a party has really broken its promises?
For the Greens?
Well, the Greens believe in more direct and participatory democracy. We feel not only should there be a right to recall governments, but more referenda on issues so that we have people getting directly involved in the decisions that affect our lives.
Thank you. And now we have...
like to see
oh, yes, certainly from the Family Coalition Party.
Yeah. Now, I mean, the ballot box is the best way to send a message to politicians who are not responding to the wishes of the voters. So just vote them out and vote somebody else in.
Well, excuse me, I would like to, if I may, just add something there. You see, we have a problem here. In 1984 and 1988, the federal progressive conservatives promised one thing and delivered quite another. They broke every single promise they had. Now, what are the voters supposed to do? They're told they have to wait till the next election. The same thing is true of the Liberal Party. I don't think that's an adequate answer, and it certainly isn't democratic.
Thank you. And now a question for the Libertarians. Hello?
Hello.
Yes, what's your question, please?
Yes, for Mr. Stock. Outside of public education, is the Libertarian Party prepared to increase funding to police forces to combat the rampant drug problem in this province?
Very much so. We think the drug problem is one of the worst problems we have, and violence on the streets and the increase in violent crime is very disturbing. We see that the government should do a lot more to make the courts more efficient and deal promptly with problems so that the police can bring cases and get them put through the courts, and that the people who are arrested are not kept unfairly waiting 3, 6 and 12 months for trial.
All right. Is there someone else who'd like to respond to that question? Yes. Yeah, from the Family Coalition Party.
Yeah, you cannot solve the drug problem just by throwing money at it, although I do believe that more money has to be spent in this area, especially in the area of education. But prevention alone police action alone is not enough. What you have to do is bolster family life and make it possible for people to find a meaning in life and to have some solidarity with other people. And if they have a meaning in their lives, they will not turn to drugs.
Yes, for the Communists.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that the question is not so much the police. I think the police have a lot of money already, and the police shootings of black teenagers in northern Toronto would indicate that there is another problem. The problem isn't drugs at all. I think if we're serious about fighting drugs, which I think are a problem, then we have to look at fighting poverty, and we have to look at improving social so that there's a social net. And specifically, speaking of fighting poverty, I think we have to talk about affordable housing that isn't a housing ghetto, such as in northern Toronto.
Thank you very much for that explanation for the Green Party.
Well, the Green Party would argue that our drug problem is a result of social issues such as poverty, poor housing. We need more education. And we need a government that's going to address human and social need before it embarks on programs like nuclear construction.
And for the Freedom Party?
I think it's an entire waste of time for our police departments and our politicians to make laws trying to fight drugs the hard way. I believe in one principle dealing with law when it comes to drugs, and that's user be responsible. I mean, why should the taxpayer be raped and pillaged for all his money to deal with people who don't want to even help themselves? I think it's a legitimate function for the state to intervene in a drug case if a person on drugs, for any reason to do with drugs, commits a crime in the commission of obtaining that drug or in using it.
Thank you very much. And now, Caceres for the Communist Party. A question for the Communists. Hello.
Hello.
Yes. What's your question, please?
Good evening. I have a question for the Communist Party representative. My question is this. What kind of program do you have if you are weaning or something now, today, when is the whole communist system is collapsed in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe? And our question for everybody in the table, I'm ethnic, and any
well,
time
let's
when
do, excuse me,
election day is coming, the multicultural politics is glorified. But realistically, day by day, this doesn't leave. What do you do if you are winning?
Okay, those were very clearly two questions. We will get the answer to the first, and if time, for the second. Thank you. Go ahead.
Well, on the first question, I'm not running in any of the socialist countries or the former socialist countries. However, I think that the events in most of them last year would indicate that socialism is trying to find a way to democratize and to restructure and to meet the needs of its people and to be responsive to its people. The people of Ontario are still waiting for the Premier of this province to indicate that he made a big mistake stopping the fight against free trade, and that he's made a big mistake not putting up the kind of a fight against the GST that is demanded. So I think people are expecting democracy not only in the socialist countries but in this province and in this election, and I think that it's up to the parties to deliver.
All right, I think the other part of the question is probably more appropriate for the other candidates to answer, having to do with a policy on multiculturalism, and let's start with you, with the Family Coalition Party.
I'm not sure exactly what he meant, but as far as multiculturalism goes, I'm an immigrant myself. I'm very proud of my heritage, but I became integrated into the Canadian mosaic as soon as possible. I became a citizen as soon as possible, and this is what I think we should encourage immigrants to do: become active in their community as Canadian citizens as soon as possible. Although it's nice to have the cultural diversity and to have the festivals, etc., the clothes, the customs, the languages, but I think those groups who are organizing those things should pay for those things themselves.
All right, thank you. For the Freedom Party?
Yes, I don't think it's the government's responsibility to get involved in multiculturalism at all. As soon as you have the government involved in it, it starts determining what the culture is, and that's not what multiculturalism is all about.
Thank you.
A truly multicultural society is a free one.
For the Greens.
I'd like to address the questioner's first issue, and that is the changing nature of the socialist bloc. We are spending billions of dollars, in fact trillions of dollars every year worldwide on weapons of mass destruction. Every minute we spend $2 million on military weapons, and that's when there are people who are starving, who don't have proper drinking water. The amount of money required to provide adequate water, food, clothing, health care, shelter, and education for everyone in the world who doesn't have it is the same amount of money we spend worldwide every 2 weeks on military weapons.
Thank you. For the Libertarians?
Multiculturalism is a very valuable feature of our society. However, I agree that we should not spend a lot of government funding on promoting it. I think that people should be Canadian first and ethnic second, and encouraging their children and continuing their ethnic traits should be something that they look after for themselves.
Thank you very much.
Can I have a word on the second question?
Well, very briefly, very briefly.
Well, very briefly, I think that money has to be put up to protect the rights of ethnic groups to their heritage and so on. I think there's a different question, however, with respect to Francophone rights in Ontario, which have to do with the rights of a national minority, and that's the question of Bill 8. And I don't think any of these parties have adequately addressed that problem, and several of them, in fact, are guilty, it seems to me, of coming very close to contravening the criminal code in terms of hate laws, things that have been said in Northern Ontario by CORE, for example.
Which is not here tonight, but thank you for the comment.
But others I know have the same view.
Right. For a question for the Freedom Party, I would like to go on to the next question, if I might. I know you'd like to...
I'd like to rebut that.
All right, for the Libertarians,
that was a definite accusation. As far as our party is concerned, we believe in providing multilingual service so that all nationalities, all ethnic people on first coming here who can't communicate properly with the government have a chance to do that.
All right.
So this would be done by using interpreter service rather than training multitudes of government officials to speak languages other than their mother tongue.
Thank you very much. And now David has a question for the Freedom Party.
Hello?
Yes, we're listening.
Okay, well, actually it's for the whole panel.
Okay.
What are they going to do if they are elected regarding the bill that came out 4 years ago to reduce rents of 4% when the friends of the Liberal Party can put the rents up by 28% and they can appeal and they can still get their money? Now, what each and individual party are going to do on this subject?
All right. I think that's a question about rent controls, and I did say the Freedom Party first, so we'll start and work from side to side.
Sure. Well, rent controls have to be abolished. Believe it or not, rent controls constrict the supply of available housing for people. We have to encourage people to be able to make a profit in the rental business, otherwise there will not be the affordable housing available. If a person is told that as a landlord he does not control his own property but that someone else does, you can bet there's going to be a shortage created in that very area that the government controls, and that's a pattern you'll see anywhere in the world it's tried.
Thank you. For the Green Party.
There's so many examples of abuse of the current system that the Liberals have brought in, of landlords artificially raising rents by dolling up their lobbies, for instance. The Green government would bring in legislation such that tenants had the right to refuse superficial improvements used to increase rents.
Thank you. For the Family Coalition Party?
We also believe that rent controls eventually should be abolished, but I think you have to phase them out over a period of time. And the only way you can do that is to increase the supply of housing. And I think in this area, what the government should concentrate on is getting truly affordable housing built. For example, such as making government land available only to developers who will build truly affordable housing. I mean, housing for maybe a family with 1 or 2 children, or seniors, for example.
Thank you. For the Communist Party?
Well, what we don't have and what we need is rent controls. What we have is very weak rent review legislation, which allows landlords to simply dip in and help themselves. And what we need is rent controls that will make it illegal for them to do so. I agree that the question of the stock of housing is extremely important. Leaving the question of housing stock to the private sector has proved to be absolutely inadequate and has caused the crisis we're in now. The provincial government has to get into the housing business. We think 100,000 units of non-profit housing should be built every year, because housing should be a right, not a privilege.
Thank you. Libertarians?
I'd agree that we should have 100,000 units of non-profit housing every year, but at the same time I think that this has to be provided by the private sector. The government cannot enter into this business of building housing and do it efficiently. Private sector can do it much more efficiently. Rent control over the last 20 years has reduced the vacancy rate from 10% to 1%. In fact, it's not doing the job, because now the taxpayer has to provide the money to build affordable housing. Our policy is to take the government out of the situation, do a phase out of rent controls, and bring back the private sector that was doing such a wonderful job 20 years ago.
Thank you very much. Just a reminder that this is a program that gives you an opportunity to talk to representatives of some of the alternative parties in Ontario. The parties represented here tonight are the Communist, Family Coalition, Freedom, Green and Libertarian parties. If you have a question to ask or a comment to make, you can call 445-5580. That's 445-5580. Area code 416. And now let's go to Joe, who has a question for the Libertarian Party. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
My question is about immigration backlog on the refugee side. It's costing the government twice the amount of money that they had budgeted for, and not only is it costing the federal government, what is the responsibility of the provincial government in this regard? Most of the backlog payments live in Ontario, from what we understand.
All right. No, just one question at a time, please. Did I say that was for the Libertarians at first?
Yes.
I did. Well, then it's for you, Mr. Stock.
Thank you. Our party position is that people who wish to immigrate to this country should be able to do so.
That's it. Thank you. For the Greens.
We'd like to highlight the radical differences in the standard of living between the Western countries and the Third World. 5% of the world's population in the West consumes a full 1/3 of all the world's resources, while the majority of people live in abject poverty. We need to change our current lifestyles so that we consume less, because our Earth cannot take first of all, it doesn't have the non-renewable resources.
Could you bring your answer around to the question
Hold on.
directly of immigration?
First of all, we don't have the non-renewable resources for continued consumption. Secondly, we can't stand the byproducts of production, the wastes. But finally, we need to be more sharing of these precious resources that we do have worldwide. And in terms of accepting people who are refugees from other situations in the Third World, we need to welcome people who are fleeing from situations which are unacceptable.
The Freedom Party.
Well, certainly ideally it would be great to have open immigration, and it's certainly something I would advocate in principle. One of the great dangers with open immigration in Canada today is the great degree of social programs and social obligations that we put on people when we let more people in. And this catches the government in an awkward situation. And this is why we're seeing these kind of backlogs. They really don't want to let more people in because they already can't afford to sustain the people that are already on the social system. And that's unfortunate. If you want to have open immigration, you've got to get the government out of people's lives.
Thank you. Family Coalition?
Well, one reason why we can't sustain our social programs is because our birth rate is so low, mainly due to to abortion, actually. So our party would be in favor of a generous immigration policy and at the same time compassion for people who are true refugees. I think we have to welcome these people, and even if it costs some money, you know, we have to provide a home for them.
Thank you. For the Communist Party?
Why, that's an absurd linkage between abortion and social programs and immigration. And I suppose it's typical of the party that Mr. di Rocco is speaking here for. Our present policy federally is a racist immigration policy. It is interested in white Anglo-Saxon European immigrants with skills to come and work here, and is very biased against people from other countries. Canada needs immigrants, and it's the immigration to this country which has built up this country in the first place. I don't know what we're talking about here. There's some very strange ideas at this table.
Yes, Mr.
Can I respond to her
yes,
accusation that was an absurd statement? It's not absurd. If you don't have a high enough birth rate, then you cannot sustain your social programs. Who's going to pay all the taxes to pay for things like seniors pensions and all the other social programs that we have? This is one of the reasons why we have problems in Canada.
I think
I'd like to respond to that.
okay, I will let you respond in a moment. Before I do, though, I'm just going to mention to viewers that the number here is 445-5580, 445-5580. If you have a question or a comment for any of the representatives of these alternative parties in this provincial election, you can call now, and we will try to get your call on the air. I think the issue that has not been addressed directly that you may wish to discuss, even though I don't think it has been an issue that has been big in this election, is the one of abortion, and I don't want to open into a full debate on this, but why not make your very clear comments simply and directly about where you stand on the issue, starting with the Family Coalition Party?
Well, we're completely opposed to government funding of abortion. That is the case now in Ontario. You, the taxpayers, are paying for abortion. And there are even cases where abortionists extra bill. For example, Henry Morgenthaler can extra bill. So a woman goes in there, gets an abortion, she pays a fee, his fee, and then he bills the government for it. So you are paying for all these abortions. What we would do is abolish government funding of abortion. We cannot change the federal law, but we would do all in our power to educate people to the true consequences of abortion, both physical and psychological, for women especially.
Thank you. For the Freedom Party?
Yes, we believe in freedom of choice in abortion, but again, we don't believe that the government should be funding people's abortions. That's an individual responsibility, and if someone cannot afford any service, be it an abortion or whatever, that's an issue of poverty entirely separate from the other issues that we're talking about.
The Green Party.
The Green Party's stance is fairly clear on this issue. We believe that individuals should have greater control over their lives, and there can be no greater control over your life than that of control over your own body. It's interesting to note that 90% of the MPs in Ottawa are men, and therefore we get these atrocious laws dealing with abortion. We need more women in Parliament, more women in politics to get laws that are more reasonable for women.
Right, for the Libertarians?
We don't believe it's anybody's business but the woman herself and maybe the father of the child. Nobody should interfere. And as far as the cost of medical treatment is concerned, that should be carried by whatever scheme they subscribe to.
Right, Elizabeth Rowley.
Well, the last speaker's proposals that perhaps the father should have something to do with it lead us right back to the mess we were in last summer that horrified Canadians from coast to coast. The question
maybe you can be more specific for those people who don't know what you're referring to.
I'm talking about the Chantal Daigle case, right. And the point that I want to make here is this: you know, abortion has nothing to do with a high birth rate or a low birth rate. It has nothing to do with boyfriends or anything else. It is a right of a woman to have control over her own body, and it's that simple. And perhaps the part of the difficulty on this issue is that the leader of all the parties in this province are men. They can't get it through their thick heads that what we're talking about are women's rights. Rights, not privileges. And I think linking this whole question to social programs and taxation is a very dangerous thing to do. I'd like to talk about social programs and about taxation, but to link these things all together the way that Mr. di Rocco has done seems to me is absurd and weird.
Mr. Stock for the Libertarians.
I'm sorry that the last speaker chose to put words in my mouth. I specifically said it's nobody's business. There should be no laws governing such actions, and therefore there would be no way that anybody could challenge the woman's right to have an abortion if she wishes to do so.
You said except boyfriends, perhaps.
All right. Last comment to you, Mr. Di Rocco.
Are you accusing Premier Peterson of not being pro-abortion? You couldn't have a more pro-abortion premier in the world.
Thank you very much for your comment. And now, Don, you have a question for the Freedom Party. Don?
No, I got a question for all your panel, right?
All right, but I'm
in
going
regard of the injured workers of Ontario, right? How come that the government is using a lot of money to deny the injured workers the workmen's compensation and giving them a runaround? How, what you guys would do if you would be elected to cut down the red tape and to give the injured workers the right to collect the money what they rightfully belong to them.
Thank you, but I'm going to start off with the Freedom Party.
This was workmen's compensation, I
Workers'
believe.
compensation, as it's called now.
Well, yes, and if you don't like what workers' compensation is doing today, you're not going to like no-fault insurance tomorrow. Again, like all insurance plans, this should be privately funded and privately administered, and you'd have no problem collecting whatsoever. The government's broke, it doesn't have money, it's as simple as that.
All right. For the Green Party, a response on what would the Green Party do about workers' compensation, and the perspective of this caller is that injured workers do not really get what's coming to them.
Well, again, I think we're going to see very serious problems with no-fault insurance. It's a scheme that's very similar to workers' compensation. Your rights, if you're injured in a car accident, are going to be very severely limited, and your liability claims are going to be reduced. It's the government's way of not properly dealing with the issue.
All right. For the Libertarians?
Yeah, we don't think that the government can adequately deal with this. In fact, in most cases, they don't deal with it very well at all, and it should be privately funded.
Let's go over here to the Communist Party.
Well, injured workers have been laying their case before the governments of this province for, it must be close to 50 years now, and they have yet to get any satisfaction from any government that's been elected as yet. And what we're talking about was workers who have been injured on the job. That's the main question. It doesn't have anything to do with auto insurance. Want to talk about auto insurance, let's do that. But workers' compensation has to do about injured workers. And injured workers have a right to expect that the Workers' Compensation Board will do what it was set up to do, which is to compensate them when they are injured. And it's time that we had a government in Queen's Park that will finally deliver.
Okay, well, I want to get the answer from the Family Coalition, but then I want to delve into this a little bit further. Mr. Di Rocco, go ahead.
Well, I must admit that I'm not up on all the details of this question, but obviously you have to be in favor of fair and prompt compensation for workers and their rights. And I read articles in the papers about this, but it seems to me there are a lot of unhappy workers out there, so something has to be done about this.
All right. The question that I'd like to pursue in this regard is, you mentioned compensation and that they should get compensation right away. Is there another responsibility, though, of the Workers' Compensation Board to rehabilitate and make sure that workers can get back to work as quickly as possible?
Absolutely, but if you want to get into the history of the Workers' Compensation Board, it is so shocking that big reforms were called for, and the biggest reform that this government could bring in was to change the name from Workmen's Compensation to Workers' Compensation. That's the reform. And what is required, it seems to me, is in fact real compensation and real rehabilitation. And the day will be very welcome, frankly, when the WCB ends the practice of chasing people around, trying to trip them up and prove that they're not injured at all in order to cut them off compensation. That's what we've got with the WBC under the Peterson government.
Is there another representative who would like to enter this issue? Yes, from the Freedom Party.
Workmen's compensation, when it was first introduced, was introduced under the same guise as no fault today. They told the workers, well, this will speed up the process. You won't spend so much time in the courts. They told the employers that you wouldn't have to worry about the large insurance bills. You wouldn't have to worry about all the problems associated with these types of claims. And of course, like a credit card, it worked for a short time till the money ran out. And if you're counting on insurance funds to come out of the bottomless tax pit, well, it's not bottomless. People are starting to scream about taxes. And we have to privatize these things so that the money that you need is being invested and made larger each time you go back to the fund rather than smaller and depleted.
Thank you. At this point, I want to thank you for responding to the questions. The time has come for the closing statements, and we will proceed with the closing statements in reverse order to the opening statements. And that means our first speaker for the Libertarians is James Stock. Mr. Stock.
Yeah, first of all, in closing, I'd like to address this business of the justice system again, which seems to have got very much mixed up in following conversation. When I said we want to get drugs off the street, I didn't mean that we wanted to arrest everybody that takes drugs. What I meant was that we want to decriminalize it and take it out of the big money proposition, just the same way as the repeal of prohibition released liquor from that same situation, where it encourages crime and big money to get into the act and to generally organize crime. Further than that, I would just like to say once more, if you really want lower taxes and less government, you must vote Libertarian in this election.
Thank you. And now for the Green Party, Jim Harris.
Well, I've actually been very disappointed this evening because we haven't talked very much about the environment. And the environment is the #1 issue of concern to all people. The Peterson government has shown that they're incapable of dealing with the serious issues that are threatening our very existence here on Earth. It's interesting to note when the Green Party launched its campaign this year, and we're running 41 candidates, more than ever before, because this is such a concern. Over half the candidates at the launch were from other parties, from Liberal, Conservative, and NDP. It's because we're tired of the other parties' responses to these issues, their lack of coming up with serious solutions to the problems. So when it comes to September 6th, we hope that you'll very seriously vote Green. Thank you.
And now for the Freedom Party, Robert Metz.
I think the key to getting true change in our politics and the direction we're going in is to stop voting against things and begin voting for things. We really have to change the way we look at our government and why we vote for the things we do. I think that a vote for a Freedom Party is a vote for a change, it's a vote for a principle, and it's a vote for individual freedom of choice. Even though we're not running candidates in every single riding in Ontario, we're only running 10 this time, more important than your vote is your ongoing support, because building an organization that's electable in the future requires a lot of groundwork and a lot of grassroots activity. Freedom Party is a party of action, and I invite any viewer to examine our record. It's available to all. Thank you very kindly.
And now for the Family Coalition Party, Louis di Rocco.
Unfortunately, honesty in government is not something you can take for granted anymore. But on election day, you can change that, because in Ontario, there is still a party that believes in accountable government. A party which believes that men and women you elect should be untainted by scandal. Hard-working people who owe no favors and seek no favors. On September 6th, support a party which is not afraid to take a stand, the right stand, on issues like wide-open Sunday shopping and government-funded abortion. Vote for the Family Coalition Party.
Thank you very much. And finally, for the Communist Party, Elizabeth Rowley.
We think that in this election, voters have the opportunity to move politics decisively to the left, away from the old line Tory and Liberal parties, and towards a new majority, a people's majority, made up of more New Democrats, Greens, and the 4 communists who are running in this election campaign. A new majority, in short, that's prepared to implement a people's majority, a people's agenda in Ontario, an agenda that will call for lower taxes, not by taking services away from people, but on the basis of taxing big corporate wealth and the big coupon clippers in this province. There's lots of money in this province. The point is that it's not in the hands of taxpayers, it's still in the hands of big corporations, many of whom are moving south as a result of the free trade deal. It's time we had a government that would stand up to the federal government, tell them that Ontario wants jobs, wants a fair tax deal. You can send that message to Queen's Park on September 6th by electing communists once again to Queen's Park. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your participation. All the parties who have participated tonight, the Communist Party, the Family Coalition Party, the Freedom Party, the Greens, and the Libertarians. I hope you've enjoyed this experiment or exercise of democracy during this provincial election, and that you found the comments and the candidates tonight stimulating, and that they help you make your decision on election night. I'm David Schatzky, on behalf of Rogers Toronto Cable 10 and Rogers Communications Incorporated. Thank you very much, and bye for now. Thank you.
The preceding program has been produced and funded as a public service by Rogers Cable Systems.